KGM, over to you.
Thank you, Stevie. Hi, folks. Welcome along to the second hour of tonight's First Music Contact Regional Development Panel, brought to you by South Dublin County Council. Big thanks to Orla Scanlon in the Arts Office there for helping facilitating this. Right now, it is the Media in the US panel with Adam Lewis. Adam, we'll start by kind of saying, first of all, thanks a million for joining us this morning, all the way from Los Angeles. Can you start by talking to us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how and what you've done and what you do these days?
Sure. My name's Adam Lewis. I run a company called the Planetary Group in Los Angeles. We've been around, next year will be our 30th year. Half of that was spent in Boston, the last half in we moved to Los Angeles. Um, our world at Planetary is all about promoting new music and new artists. So we do all the things that you can to promote a new release, whether it's a single, an EP, an album, whether it's tour support, whether it's working on events. People will hire us to do radio promotion, PR, digital marketing, or playlisting. Those are generally the things that we get
Okay.
hired on. The the majority of our clients are newer artists that have releases. Every once in a while, we get lucky and you know got to work a David Bowie record a few years back, you know what I mean? But 90% of the time, it's new artists. And that's always been my world. I came out of uh, college radio as a student. That's how I learned kind of the business and writing reviews for the school newspaper and booking shows on my campus. I interned at record label.
Which university did you go to, Adam?
Nothing you would hear of. A very small liberal arts school in New England called Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce University. It was in New Hampshire, middle of nowhere. But what was great about it was only, 1,500 students. So I was able to, with my sharp elbows, I was able to kind of take it over and run the radio station, after my freshman year. So I ran my radio station for 3 years, which is not normal. Most students get to do it for maybe 1 year. So I did that for 3 years, and I did the booking on campus for 2 years, wrote for the school newspaper for 3 years. All of those things kind of got me, A, used to being my own boss, um, but B, started my network.
Yeah.
And some of those people that I worked with then, I'm still dealing with today, and they hire me, right? Still. So that's what this whole business is on every level is just your network, who you know and what you can do for each other in a kind of a crude way. But that's how I got my start, and as I was doing that as a student, I interned at a record label and they taught me radio promotion. And it was a very cool label that I mean, this shows you how old I am. This was a label that only released releases on CD. They were a CD only label, so it was called Rykodisc, and
Oh yeah.
they were reissuing projects that hadn't been put on CD yet because the majors didn't care about the CD at the time. Right. Obviously, when the label started caring about CDs, Ryko had a problem.
Yeah.
But for a brief moment in time, they had the Zappa catalog, the Elvis Costello catalog, David Bowie catalog. It was a big deal. David Bowie's records on CD for a first time, and they also signed some baby acts as well. They had Bob Mould and Sugar and Dead Can Dance and a few others. But they had one person doing all radio formats in North America there. And he couldn't obviously handle that, right? That's, in the US, that's 1,000 radio stations. We don't have statewide radio in America, right? We've got millions of stations all over the place. So it's all different formats and it's all done kind of regionally and geographically. So as an intern, they literally just handed me, 500 stations and said, yeah, call these. And kind of taught me on the fly how to do it. But when you had David Bowie in your back pocket, it was an easy way to learn,
Yeah.
right? So that's where I learned how to do radio promotion. I started managing a band also in college and put that record out of my dorm room. That taught me how to do promotion. That taught me how to do PR. that got me over my fear of cold calling people and trying to talk them into doing something that maybe they didn't want to do. And I've been doing that ever since. And it's always been grassroots. I also, at the same time as doing all of that, I was also booking shows on campus. So that kind of started to teach me how to do shows. It's fun when you're playing with school money because if you book a show that's a stiff, you're not going to the ATM at 2 in the morning to pay the band. It's a good way to learn and a good way to make mistakes. And then after college, I started booking shows, professionally as well. For the first 10 years of my career, I had a pretty schizophrenic kind of identity in that I was doing shows. I was promoting records as a publicist and a radio plugger. I also was on retainer with a record label. So people knew me as a concert promoter, a radio promoter, a band manager, a lot of different. I literally, like in my 20s, I had 4 business cards. You know, but but
A
that's
true portfolio
but
career.
yeah, but listen, as funny as that is, right, and crazy as that is, that's the music business for most people because you need to have 4 jobs to make enough to pay your bills, for one, right? Four equals one, right? That's kind of how crazy it is, right? At that age. But learned a lot of different areas. I went out on the road as a tour manager as well during my summer vacations in university. I got very lucky that a couple friends had bands that got signed to major labels. And we went out as the opening act on the Pretty Hate Machine tour, the Nine Inch Nails
Oh yeah, yeah.
first record. And then I went out. Then I went out with a band called Alien Sex Fiend from the UK, a gothic rock band from way back when, which was an experience. And that taught me tour management, and also taught me how bands think when they're out on the road alone,
Yeah.
away from the label when your record's not a hit, and that's important, to kind of know
Yeah.
what's going on there.
Strikes
So
me, it strikes me as well, man, what you're saying, that it's very much, you mentioned one word earlier on, but networking, and obviously that's really important because you find people that way. But also, like, it's very much a kind of a people business. So, like, I mean, when you are,
yeah,
no matter whether you're on the phone to someone doing a cold calling, selling a new band from Ireland, or whether you're trying to kind of find out exactly where Alien Sex Fiend have ended up in Boston, like, you do need that skills of being able to negotiate with people, deal with people, and being kind of diplomatic.
yeah, yeah. No, it's all network. It's all
Mm.
network, right?
Okay.
Everything. All of my big wins in my career have just come from the network. So and so says, "Hey, I've got something here you might be interested in. You should talk to so and so or whatever." Even just having a friend open a door or introduce you to someone else, right? And that's why reputation's so important in this business, right? If you do the wrong thing, everyone knows. You don't last long, but yeah, it's really really crucial, you
Cool.
know.
Let's zone in then on Planetary, which is, yeah, the business card you
Yep.
currently hold. And
Yep.
tell us a little bit about Planetary. Planetary is your company. When was it set up, and why did you decide to swap the East Coast to the West Coast and move from Boston to LA? And that's just the weather, surely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's why I stayed. I've definitely become soft. I can't deal with the winters of Boston anymore or the humidity in the summer. Um, the so I started, the first 4 years of me being in business um, were kind of unofficial. It's just yeah, pay me cash, or make that check out to Adam Lewis. And then finally, as you're starting and you're kind of learning, I mean, I was in my early 20s. I was too dumb to know any better that I should start, that I shouldn't start a company, right? You know what I mean? Like I probably should have waited till I was 30 and met more people and had even a bigger network, right? But when you're in your 20s, you think you know everything and you dive right in and you do it. So I started the company legitimately in 96. That's when we incorporated and filed legal paperwork and yada yada yada. And we've been doing it ever since. We started in Boston because I was from Boston. I went to school in New Hampshire. We were doing a lot of college radio marketing. New England and the Northeast is the biggest place in America for colleges. That's why the Republicans hate the Northeast, because it's, the liberal Republican, liberal area, right? A lot of schools in Boston, and a lot of bands at the time were breaking out of that, area. So it was, and also, pre-internet, all the major labels were located in Boston. They all had offices there, and they had a thriving independent record community as well, Ryko Disc and many others, a lot of punk rock labels. So there was a good ecosystem for us to build a business out of. Obviously, over time with the internet, a lot of those smaller labels faded away. The major labels consolidated. They killed off all of their branch offices, and Boston was left as more of a satellite town, and didn't have the kind of scene. At the same time, my I had brought on I had an employee that over time we became partners because he had a pretty good business sense, and whereas I was more the music guy and the network guy, he was better with numbers. So we became partners, and that worked well for a long time. Eventually, he met a girl from LA. So he needed to move to LA. So we then had an office. It's always a girl. Had an office on the West Coast as well. And then over time, he wanted out of this business, and I bought him out. And we ended up having, two offices, and it just made more sense. Again, with the way the internet consolidated everything, it got to a point where I had to be either in New York or LA. I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, so living in New York and living under the evil empire of the Yankees just didn't seem like something I could do. The weather is much nicer here, and I wasn't planning on staying. It was kind of more. I showed up out of necessity because I was buying my partner out, and I'd figure out what I was going to do. I never really officially moved here, at least in the first 10 years I was here. And then I finally, you know, I kept an apartment in Boston for a long time that I was hardly ever in, but put all my stuff in storage, all that stuff. But then finally moved here, like for real, like 4 years ago.
Okay. So
Yeah,
let's kind of like go into that kind of like how Planetary will work with a new act then. Like
sure.
talk me through basically, Adam, like like every aspect of the music industry, an agency like Planetary Group is looking for acts, right? And there's so many acts out there that you're basically kind of going like, okay, how do you choose which act is coming at you, yet you're going to go for? Surely it's not a case of it's the actor who's going to pay your bills. There are obviously other considerations. So if you're looking for a new acts who are coming at you to basically represent you, to plug their music, to get media buys for them in the States, how do you decide what act you're going to work with? You talked earlier on about reputation. Is that something that's a big marker for you? If it's an Irish act, are you talking to FMC? If it's a UK act, do you have your kind of your sources and your filters over there? Talk us through that. How you decide what act you're going to work with. What are the considerations that yourself and Planetary take into account?
Yeah, so there's always going to be trusted sources, right? You're always going to use your network to kind of find out what's going on. Um, the you can't work a bad act. You just can't, right? If the band's not good, um, it's going to be a horrible slog. You learn this really early in your career, right? Because it's going to be a slog. You've got to work that record for 2, 3, 4 months. Every day, you've somehow got to get up and get pumped to promote something that's not good. You're not going to enjoy that experience, right? You're also not going to enjoy that experience of having to report back to the artist in 3 or 4 months who's paid you several $1,000s of their hard-earned money, and you've got nothing to show for it, right? So you learn very early not to do that. You also learn that if you're pitching people, they only are going to take your calls if you're respecting their time and what you're bringing, and in terms of what you're bringing them. If you keep bringing them garbage, not taking your call, right? It is a relationship with the writer. It is a relationship with the station. You respect their inbox, you respect what they're doing, and so you're bringing them stuff that you think can work. It doesn't mean, excuse me, it doesn't mean that every record's going to be perfect for that writer or radio station. They understand that, right?
Mhm.
But they can tell the difference between something that's not right for them and something that's garbage, right? So musically, I've got to believe that it's a great project, a great artist to work with, or something that makes sense. I've got to understand it. And I also have to know how I can sell it, right? So all of those come into play. Unfortunately, the way media has changed from when I started to now, in the older days, I could work with an act that was literally starting from nowhere, nothing, right? Had very little going on. But if the record was good, I could call a journalist and blow smoke up their backside and tell them this band's amazing and you can't miss this. Like, how can you be missing this? You've got to write about it and just kind of just hype them to death. And we'd get it in the paper and we'd get it on the radio or whatever. You can't do that anymore because now people have a way of actually confirming whether there's something happening here,
Mhm.
right? Because now when I pitch someone, they're literally Googling you. It's like, and it's also, it's, I always equate it to like going for your annual physical with your doctor. They take your vital signs, right? It's the same thing with a writer or a radio person. They're looking at your Spotify numbers, right? They're looking at your social media numbers. They're looking at what's the story here? Why is this newsworthy? Because if they're going to write about it online, they want to be able to get clicks, right? They want you to share that article and they want to get the benefit of those clicks. That's how they make money. That's how they make their ad dollars. And in some cases these days, the writers, that's how they make their salary. They get paid a commission based on clicks, which is ridiculous. Some pretty large publications are done that way, and so, you can't bullshit it like you used
Okay.
to. You have to now kind of really present the story and to have to convince them that there's news there, and you have to find that writer that's willing to do it, and then that writer has to be able to pitch it to their editor as well. So all of those considerate, I had someone yesterday wanted to hire us. The music was great, and he had only sent me his Bandcamp link, and I was in a hurry yesterday, a couple days ago. I listened to it, thought it sounded great, didn't check anything else. We then had our call yesterday, and while I'm on the phone with him, I called up his Spotify. He had 8 monthly listeners. I said, I can't. I would love to work this record. I said, your record's coming out in 3 months. You need to delay your record 6 months and spend the next 6 months working on getting your numbers up everywhere, because I can't pitch this to press,
Yeah.
you know.
So
And
say
no one
say
wa- and no one wants to hear that, right?
sorry,
But
that's the first.
everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's in a hurry to get their music out, right? You spend all this time writing it and recording it and spending all this money. You're just like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta get it out. It's like, no, that's the exact worst thing you got to do. You got to stop everything and sit on it and then come up with a plan, a calendar. And so anyway, so that's how we make our, at least on the press side, we really look at that. On the, when you're doing college radio, it's just about the music, or specialist radio, it's just about the music, so it's not as tough. You can people kind of look at college radio as where you go when to get your first national attention. So you don't have to have a lot going on to do that. And same with specialist radio. Obviously, as you work your way up the ladder of radio, which we have so many different formats here, the higher you get up the ladder, the more they are looking at that data. So it becomes an issue, but it's not an issue at first. And digital marketing, that's advertising. So that's often what I recommend people to do at first. Take that money that they would spend on PR and start on digital marketing in the beginning, at least for a month or two, to try to get your numbers up a little bit. So.
Right. So basically, so then, so just to kind of follow, just to kind of confirm what you just said there, in terms of getting the initial numbers up, you're looking at digital marketing, which is kind of like mean paying for advertising and building things up that way. And college radio is a good place to go as well. The one question I want to kind of ask you before we go any further, because you mentioned consolidation earlier on in terms of the music industry, which would be a reason why you kind of you could actually do everything out in one office or whatever. From your point of view, it's really good. In terms of consolidation, and when it comes to the media in the United States, have we seen an awful lot of titles being shuttered? Have we seen an awful lot of places that you would have kind of considered safe harbors for new music, coverage of new music shutting down? And if that's the case, what are the key places now in terms of kind of like, what are the key publications? What are the key kind of like radio outlets when it comes for you kind of going like, this is the AAA, this is the kind of the premier shit I'd love to get for an act.
Yeah, there's definitely There's definitely a lot of places that are gone, which stink, right? I mean, if you just look at a daily newspaper, I'll just use Boston as an example. Boston had the Boston Globe. Well,
Mhm.
Boston has had two daily newspapers, first of all. They still do, barely, but they do. But the Boston Globe had, which was the paper of record, three rock critics full time, a world music critic, a folk critic, a classical, an opera, a jazz. I'm trying to think if they had, and then someone who did their hip hop that also did something else there.
Just 10.
So, right, okay, and then you've got freelancers, and then you had various sections of the paper that weren't critics, but they had editors and listing editors that were looking at what was going on around town and were posting photos and listings and editorial pics of what was happening, right? So that's a lot of people that you could go after, right? Um, I used to play a game. In America, the Sunday paper is the big paper. I think in Europe, a lot of places, it's a Saturday paper. But Sunday Boston Globe had multiple
Section.
sections. Um, and I used to play a game because the paper was so big and had so many sections, um, the editors didn't talk to each other. Right? So you'd have the art section, you'd have the calendar section, and then you had a what's happening in the city this week kind of section. I used to try to see how many photos. So if I had a band's promo photo, I'd try to see how many times I could get the same photo to run in the same issue of the paper on the same day in the same paper, right? And it would be three or four times, which is crazy, crazy, because that's how big they were, right? So those people are all gone, right? They're all gone. The Globe doesn't have any full-time music people whatsoever, right? They've got a couple of freelancers and they have like an arts editor that kind of does all things arts. That's it,
Mhm.
right? And so you extrapolate that out, throughout the whole country. You also had a vibrant, very vibrant weekly alternative uh, paper, so just I don't know what the equivalent would be, but
The equivalent over here has been gone a long time. Something like the Adventure
yeah,
will be the
yeah.
equivalent to Village Voice, for
Yeah.
example.
So that's all gone, right? And now the websites, the blogs have had a hard time making money, right? And during the pandemic, they cut and cut and cut, and where there were two editors, there's now one. And where there were staff writers, there's now freelancers. And so it's just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So it definitely makes it harder. What I find on the PR side is that there's no middle class, right? It's all either pitchfork, stereo gum, paste, like large kind of places, or it's Bob's Great Review site, whatever you want to call it, right? John's Record Reviews, blog that has, 50 readers, a month. Not a lot of middle class, right? And so that's the struggle of doing PR. And that's often why, we will also tell people if you don't have a lot of a story going on, that it doesn't make sense to do press right off the bat,
Mhm.
I say that at a certain point you've got to try, right? And you do have to start having some sort of footprint online. Um, because if you think about like when you're pitching your band to anyone, a booking agent or whomever, they are Googling you and they want to see something come up other than your Bandcamp, and your Instagram page. So having some reviews, helps even if they're smaller places and, getting a couple of quotes is helpful for your stat sheet and whatnot. And it also gives you content for your social media. And there's also a hope that some of those younger writers at those smaller
Yeah.
sites will graduate to larger sites, right? And that happens too. If you take a long view of doing press, then it can be worthwhile. The problem comes with expectations when you're hiring a publicist because it is so much work and time. It is so time consuming, even to get a small review. It's expensive. And you could spend $4,500, 6 grand, 7 grand, on a press campaign and get, you know, 10, 15 reviews in sites that, no one's heard of, right? Maybe you get some listings in some larger sites. Maybe there's some things that you can build off of. You have to know that going in. And so that's why you're always careful about diving into press. And that's why sometimes other options make sense in the beginning, like digital marketing, like college radio, et cetera, right? So it's all every act is going to come to us at a different level and with different needs, and different things are going to make more sense. Like if you're not a strictly indie rock, indie pop act, trying to get blog coverage might be really tough for you, right? The blogs definitely kind of go in one direction, right? College radio, very diverse. Playlisting, very diverse. Digital marketing, you can target anyone. So every act has different kind of, we're going to look at it different ways on what makes the most
Mm.
sense for them.
So you said something there about expectations, and that's something that we've been hammering home during this whole process as well about managing expectations. Everything takes time. That takes 5 years to be an overnight success. In terms of the expectations, when a new client comes to you, and when a band is coming to you, and you kind of you're giving them the kind of like the good stroke bad news. So if you give me 6 grand, I can give you kind of reviews in John's blog. I give you reviews in Bob's blog.
I would
I
never,
can't.
well, I would never say that, right? I would
I
never
know, I know, I know. But
promise
yeah,
anything
you
other than
understand,
efforts.
but you're being realistic, Adam. You're kind of like,
Yeah.
I mean, you're showing them what's inside the kimono. You're showing them what's ahead. So
Yeah.
it's like, do bands kind of go into you? Are they realistic in terms of them kind of saying to you, okay, or do they kind of go like, well, that might apply to everyone else. It doesn't apply to us.
Yeah, you nailed it. Bands and realistic in the same sentence. Yeah, listen, it's I had that same person I spoke to yesterday that had the 8 listeners, his first pushback was, but we've spent a lot of time and effort making this record. This record's brilliant, and I just think that, if people hear it, they'll want to write about it. And to that
God
I just
bless
have
you.
to,
God bless you. Listen.
that's well listed, God bless the dream, and listen, I have to dream too, right, as well, but I also get punched a lot, right? And you learn, and I know that he won't remember that conversation in 3 months when he's looking at his credit card bill and I'm handing him a bunch of reviews by artists on blogs that he hasn't heard of, right? So you have to kind of be brutally honest with them, and and I'm okay if they don't hire me. They can go hire someone else, and maybe they'll get lucky. There is always the chance of someone covering it, right? I can be wrong. There can be a writer that goes, "Oh my God, I love this," and write about it. It just doesn't happen as much as you wish it did because they
So
just
so
don't they just don't have the outlet to do it.
Right. So in terms of that kind of like that moonshot then and that kind of like the chances like for example someone may release a record and someone they suddenly find themselves being covered by the New York Times for example and that's the big thing. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't happen that often but it does still
No.
happen. Is that sort of like part of the kind of the saying the dream as well?
It does still happen, although most of the time when people think an artist has come out of nowhere and exploded or got something, it's normally been several years of behind the scenes working their way up to that. Like
Hmm.
do you know what I mean? Like
I do,
they
yeah.
just, yeah. I mean, even we had a huge hit last year with at radio with Chapel Roan, right? Uh, by the time that record broke, we had started that campaign 2 years prior,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's with a major label pressing go the whole time, right? So that's what you're up against. Yes, it absolutely happens. The problem now, Jim, is that the press outlets, the New York Times of the world, they don't have the flexibility and outlets that they used to have to be able to moonshot something. there was again, the rock, the primary number one rock critic in the Boston Globe used to have a column every week, every Friday. It was called Rock Notes, and it's where he'd put
What
all
was
the
his name?
stuff.
What was his name? Is that Greg Tate? No,
No,
Jim DeFeus.
he was known in Ireland. Steve Morris. He was very close with you
Oh, yeah,
two.
yeah.
You two came to his retirement party in Boston. That's how well loved he was, right? So he had a column called Rock Notes. And, he was obviously being pitched dozens of stories a week. He can only do a couple, right? Whatever it may be. Maybe he's doing, 4 or 5 stories a week. But in Rock Notes, he could take care of everyone in one column because he could write 4 sentences about everything. And he would just do, you two have a new single out this week called such and such. Sounds amazing. Dot, dot, dot. Cranberries playing the Worcester Centrum this week. Tickets still available. Dot, dot, dot. And it would just go on like that. And you would get this whole overview, right? And so it had all this opportunity. So he'd be able to say, received a CD from a band I never heard of this week. It's called the So-and-Sos. They're playing on Wednesday at the Burn. Go check them out.
Yeah.
It's one of the best CDs I've ever heard. You know what I mean? They had opportunities to do things like that, or they could even, do a review or something because they wanted to, because it was journalism and because ad dollars, were there. That's all gone. Ad dollars are gone, space is gone, and those types of columns are gone. So it's very hard for them to do a moonshot. Now a moonshot is like the New York Times flips out on something and they'll put it on a playlist. Doesn't cost them anything, right? And they'll do something like that, right? So those type of things, it can happen for sure. It just you can't put the moonshot in your ad budget or your marketing plan, right? It's like trying to predict something going viral.
Okay, so then we're looking for kind of reasons for our bands here from Ireland to stand out. Is
Right.
Irish music having a moment, or is there an exorcism of some sort, or sort of like an appeal that Irish acts have? We're a great little country, kind of thinking where everyone loves us, for example. Is that coming true? Is the success of, you mentioned, say, for example, Cranberries and U2 there? Like, we're seeing acts like Hosier. Who else we've seen? The Fontaines DC. We're seeing kind of
Yeah.
Kneecap. These acts. Is that having an effect? So because of that, are some of the publications that are worth pitching to, are they kind of going, hey, hang on a second, this is from Ireland. I might give it a little bit more of time than I give to something to say from kind of like Taiwan.
I think Asia is going to have its moments, but
Yeah,
that's another
yeah.
conversation. But and not just with pop. There's always a love affair with Irish bands because everyone's a little Irish, and we do St. Patrick's Day better than you guys, right? So,
Well,
um,
that's our boat now, Adam. You know what I mean? You call it St. Paddy's Day
well, we
for a
party
start,
we party
and that
harder.
beer you drink is not very nice.
No, this is true. Everyone's a little Irish in America, right? Either literally or figuratively. So Irish bands are always loved in America for sure. I also think that in general, I tell all of my overseas bands and clients that being an overseas act marketing in the U.S., I always think is an advantage to some extent. It's not an advantage in that you can't be in the market all the time and reinforcing everything, and touring constantly, right? Like an American band could. But uh, I do think that people are apt to check something out from a foreign land when we pitch them. If I say, "Hey, I've got a cool new band from Ireland or from Estonia or for wherever," like that's kind of interesting. It's not like saying, here's a new band from Williamsburg or Brooklyn or like that's been done a few times, right?
Mhm.
You guys always have a steady stream, but you're not overwhelming us with a million bands either, right? And for a band to kind of get on our radar, to be export ready over here, or an artist to be export ready, they've already gone through multiple steps in their home country to be good enough to be coming here. So they probably don't stink, right?
Yeah.
And so that's always a good thing. And yeah, I mean, listen, Fontaines is an amazing story. Kneecap, who we've worked with, is an interesting story. Gurriers, Orla Gartland, like there is a steady flow of stuff. We're doing Orla Gartland right now as well, and we're doing an industrial band from Dublin called Yard right now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And there's always stuff, right? So yeah, I think it is a marketing thing, and it's also if you're touring, if you want to come over and actually do some shows, you'll find plenty of responsive places on the East Coast and to play your first shows. There's always an Irish pub in every town, right? So you can always book yourself a show, your first tour. I mean, I remember doing that with Black 47 and Saw Doctors and like a whole bunch of that kind of stuff, 30 years ago, right? And they would just
Yeah.
go up and down the coast from Philly to Boston, back and forth, and kind of work that market, whether they were Irish or half Irish, half New York Irish. You
Yeah.
know, but so yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely use that to an advantage for sure.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about kind of like being consolidation in the media industry, which means the number of outlets is going down. We've talked about kind of how hard it is for people to take chances on acts right now. We've talked about like, I mean, if a band is starting out, they need to get their numbers up. They need to be, so when someone Googles them, they're seeing some kind of things there. Are you seeing like little? I want to before we could turn to the questions from the audience. This has been brilliant, Adam. I really, really appreciate you giving us the time as well this morning to talk to
Yeah,
us.
it's fine.
But
I do this all day, every day, right? I mean, it's
brilliant.
basic. This is no different than answering the questions from every band that calls me or emails me every day, right? And I try to be really accessible to people to answer these questions, so I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. So then my next question is basically, are you still optimistic? Are there still ways for kind of bands if they've got their shit together, if the stuff's to break it through, to get through?
Yeah.
But like me, I want a bit of optimism from you, Adam.
Yeah, listen, I'm an optimistic person, right? I know maybe I don't sound it
No, you do. No,
always,
you do. You sound
but
you sound
yeah,
but you're painting
yeah.
you're painting a very realistic picture of
But
what's there.
I'm optimistic, but also realistic, right? In that, I try, like I said, I try to point people in the direction where they can have, some success, right? So, yeah, I'm optimistic that that artists can still push through. I think that it just takes longer, and people have to be patient and consistent, have a plan. I mean, like I said, Chaperone was 2 years in the making. Last dinner party we worked with, that was a year in the making, right? I mean, it takes time. You can't have these sugar highs. These lucky artists that have these viral hits tend to really come and go very quickly, and they can't sell out a phone booth, I like to say, again, showing my age, after 6 months, right? They don't, because they don't make the fans. Long and slow means you can develop fans and make those personal connections one at a time. And they want to come to your show. They want to buy your merch. They're going to your band camp, and they're with you long periods of time. The viral stuff, you're making fans of the song as opposed to the fans of the band or the artist, if that makes sense, right? That's
Yes.
one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of college radio, because even though it's not huge and you don't blow up from it, the people that are listening to it and the DJs that are doing those shows are true music fans, total music nerds. The people at the stations are probably in a basement of a building somewhere with no windows and bad ventilation, and they're doing it as volunteers, playing these records by these new artists. They love you, right? That's why they're playing you, and they want to grow with you, and they become ambassadors for you, and they listen to the whole album, and they play the songs that they like, and they curate a show off of that album, as opposed to Spotify, which is jamming one song down your throat in this kind of singles culture, forever, right? So, still a big fan of radio, even though it's not the shiny, sexy new thing. I think
Mhm.
social media obviously is very important, and you have to do it. The problem for artists now is you have to do everything, right? But I also think, be honest with where your fans are and your demographic is. It might not make sense for you to be on TikTok if you're of a certain age, shall we say, or a certain style of music. And also if you're not comfortable doing that. And the TikTok requires you to be on there daily,
Yes.
constantly, right? And that's a huge commitment, and you might not have enough to say nor the desire to do it at that level, right? Instagram is a great tool, and if you're an older act, maybe Facebook is where to go, because that's where older people are. It just depends on the act, right? Um, but yeah, no, I'm optimistic. I still think you can, break things. I'm not sure if it's as fun as it was. You know what I mean? You don't have it's all, we're looking at data now more, right? I didn't get into the music business to look at statistics and graphs, right? I got in the music business for, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I'm still waiting, but I might have missed it, but it is kind of what it is now, right? And never have there been so many tools for you to be able to use to kind of look and see where your fans are. And also, never has there been a way for you to communicate with your fans like that before. In the old days, 20 plus years ago, we used to do radio campaigns only in certain regional parts of the country because the band was never going to have their record in the stores outside of that area to purchase. So what was the point of having airplay? Now everything's digital. People can hear a record, someone can hear your record in Alaska, Hawaii, Miami, Boston, doesn't matter. They can, if they hear it and they like it, they can follow you on socials. They can buy your music on Bandcamp. They can stream you on Spotify. They can send you an email, and within an hour, they'll probably know everything about you and
Yeah,
what you had for breakfast.
yeah,
That wasn't a thing, you know, 20 years ago, right?
right.
So yeah, I am optimistic on that, so as much as things change and some things are bad, other things change and it's great.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to get the questions now from the audience. That's great. And especially that last point you made. I mean, I'm a big fan of kind of morning becomes eclectic on KCRW. So
yeah.
your local hometown station. And I've found so much new music from all over the world from Novena Carmel. It's just like it's quite incredible to think that, you know?
And do you know her history? She's a musician.
She's a musician and Sly Stone's her daddy, right?
She's Sly Stone's daughter. Yeah, so
Yeah,
she's pretty
yeah.
funky. She likes
Yeah, she's
to,
really, really good.
she works in some great soul and funk in the morning, and she's great. And KCRW is wonderful. KEXP, another fantastic station. These are college radio stations. They are at the pinnacle. They are the two biggest college radio stations in North America. They have massive online listenerships. And radio's different these days, right? It's not just, of course, there's plenty of people listening in their car driving home, right? I listen to KCRW all the time in my car. But it's more often KCRW is playing a record, they like it. They then have the band come in, or KXP even
Yeah,
more so. They then have the band or artist come in, perform live, they film
yeah.
it, they put it up on their YouTube channel, and they've got 500,000 viewers around the world tuning into that video, and that video goes viral, and that gives you something to share on socials. We see it all the time. We had one of our bands this week. KXP posted the performance of a interview and performance that the band did, and all of a sudden we get 1 million followers on our socials just as the PR company because we got tagged, right? So
Yeah.
it's for the band, it's obviously exponential. When we did, if you remember the British band we did their
Oh, yeah.
comeback
Mark
record
Johnson. Yeah.
last year, and we had a video with KXP with them last year, and when that video went live, I mean, it was just thousands of followers and likes, and so it's just
Cool.
radio is happening in different ways, right? And it creates other content for us. Like a lot of stations will do a song of the day with a free download. Again, that gives you something for you to put on your socials and to promote and to expose. College and non-commercial radio is the last place where the DJ actually is picking and curating a show for you based on their taste. They're going to take you on a journey. And no, as much as the algorithm wants to do that, we've all been in the algorithm and gone, why the hell does the computer think I want to hear that song, right? That is the beauty of kind of non-com and college radio still is that discovery and passion. And that's why I'm still a big fan of it today. And also, I'm a big fan too because it can't be corrupted by money like all the other Spotify has got all sorts of issues with fake plays and this and that, and press is dominated by the majors, and social media costs money and is dominated by large firms. College radio, non-commercial radio is a level playing field. So there's a top 200 chart every week that is published of the most played records at college radio every week, and out of those 200, 180 of them are labels you never heard of. Right? Or smaller labels, independent labels, and they're almost all artists that you haven't heard of, with the exception of like, maybe 20 that are, the new Nick Cave record or something like that, that's kind of a core artist for that format. But it's a level playing field for new artists to get their exposure. And they also have subgenre charts as well, because all of these stations have subgenre shows. So they'll have an Americana show, a singer-songwriter folk show, a world music show, a hip hop, metal, electronic, etc. So with college radio, I can work any type of music as long as it's good. So I
Yeah.
don't have to be selective about what I take on. As long as it's good, for genre-wise, I can work anything to radio. Whereas on the press side, I have to be really kind of more in the indie rock, indie pop
Cool.
realm.
Okay. I'm going to rapidly fire through some of the questions that are coming in. Really, Adam, so that really good time for you. So, thanks for your time. First of all, is there a contact for you? What's the best email address to get you on?
It's really easy. Adam at planetarygroup.com. And
Adam at planetgroup.com. Stevie will
and
throw that into the chat. Do you work with solo acts too? That's a question from Eddie.
sure. Yeah, sure.
You
Sure.
work with anyone?
It's tough, solo acts, it's always tough to, it's not fair, right? Because like singer-songwriters are the birth of all music, right? Of the troubadour and the guitar is like the birth of rock and roll. But it is also very hard to promote, Jimmy Smith, his new record, right? But if that same guy and the same record calls it, The Boy Who Caught the Sun or whatever, make up some name, right? It's
I like
perfect to
that.
market. No problem. I could get that on the charts. No problem, right? So that's the only problem on the singer-songwriter, front is that it is a little bit hard to stand out on that, because there's a lot of sensitive folks walking around with guitars, right? And it's hard to stand out of that pack. But yeah, if it's good, we'll absolutely work it. And yeah, happy. Well, work anything as long as it's good.
Okay, so thanks very much to Eddie and to TJ for those questions. Question from Sandrine: do you specialize in certain genres only? I think you're an equal genres fan.
Yeah, like I said, radio, any genre, press will be a little more selective. And
Cool.
digital marketing, we can do any genre, right? Because it's just advertising. Same with playlisting. We can do any genre. It's
Cool.
really just press that we have to be more selective.
Cool. Danielle's got a question here on TikTok, which you answered just before we came on to that one. And then there's a good question here from Shawnee. And in relation to numbers, what if you just have no aptitude for social media? Do you just suck it up and get it done? Good question.
Suck it up.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
Shawnee.
I mean, listen, if you've got the time, just put a little bit of time in every day. First of all, you don't have to try to be on every single social media site out there, right? Pick one that you're comfortable with, right? And own that one and experiment. Take some chances. It's you can spend $5 or $10 a week on Instagram and see what's working in terms of posting, promoting some of your posts. You need to spend a little bit of money with your posts. You can't just post it and think that the world's going to discover it, because what'll happen is only your inner circle and only, 20% of that inner circle will see it, right? Um, you want to spend 10 bucks or whatever promoting it so that it gets to your friends, and starts getting out there a little bit. But more importantly, you will learn more about yourself in terms of demographics if you can look at that data, right? And it's money well spent. And but yeah, suck it up and do a little bit of it. You've got to have something on there. You got to have something on there. And if you really aren't comfortable doing it and really aren't good at it, ask for some help. Right. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that are good at it. It needs to be your voice, though, right? That's the thing about social media, is like you can't fake it, right? But you can get people to help you with it.
hmm Okay, so then there's a few more kind of generally kind of questions come in. One here from Matilde, and it's what's a standard set of things or informations to share to a radio station or media to be interested to promote it? Is it does it like that's obviously kind of like mean the sheet with kind of does pull quotes or things like that. But is there anything else that should be put on that?
With radio at the college non-com level, it's really about the music. So we host everything on a service called Disco, where we'll host the music. It allows them to stream it, to check it out, and then to download it if they want it. And then within that, the ISRC code is included, the artwork. We include a brief bio, um, and we'll include the lyrics, and we'll include the artwork. Within that bio, we can put any pull quotes or anything that we think is important to convey. With radio, less is more. It's much more elevator pitch style bio than what a writer would be, right? Because it's radio. They don't need a lot of info, right? And nothing I write to a radio station is going to get them to play the record if the song sucks, right? So it's, less is more.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Send them, Disco works really well because it allows them to stream it without downloading it. But then if they want it, everything that they want is there that they can download it. On the press side, again, have a streaming link. You'd never attach a file to an email and send it to a writer. Like that's the quickest way to have your email
Jesus.
deleted. So you want to have a streaming link and then a link for them to download it if they want more. Again, have links, all links to all of those assets so they can download it if they need it. And then, yeah, have a bio. It can be a little longer than a radio one, right? But not crazy, right? I mean, it's still the days of sending out the full page bio over, right? We used to do that. We used to have a cover letter, a bio, and then maybe a quote sheet. It used to be like a 3 or 4 page thing that we would send out. That was standard because that was because we were pitching. Are you waiting for it? Sit down. We were pitching writers. We are no longer pitching writers. They're all unemployed. We're now pitching bloggers, right? It's very different because even the biggest article in Pitchfork is, 600 words, right? Or it's not long, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to send a ton of stuff. Keep it succinct. If they want more, they'll get it, and use links so that people can access that material if they need it, but not as attachments.
Cool. It's a very good question here in from Sandrine. I think it's probably one of those kind of like quiet part out loud. Some people probably people are thinking it, but she's the only one who's kind of put it down. Which is there what specific numbers? What's the threshold? When you talk about numbers earlier on, you gave the example of a lad who kind of
Yeah,
eight monthly listeners. Are you talking about a minimum of 2,000 listeners a month on Spotify? Are you talking
yeah,
about a minimum of 1,000 people on your various socials? What's the minimum, Adam, that you're looking for?
yeah. I had someone last week contact me, and they had 0 plays. I said to him, I said, "Where's your mother?" Right? I mean, I just couldn't believe it. Um, there's no minimum. It's it's really you know it when you see it, and what it feels like, what it looks like when you're looking at those numbers. Um, the I think that there's a grain of salt a little bit with overseas artists if they're coming from smaller countries. Like in Australia, if an artist has 250,000 monthly listeners, like that's a lot, right? It's a smaller country, right? So, you notice this, right? Whereas in the US, it's like, all right, that's solid. Um, you know, Again, for radio, there's no threshold. I think for press, you've definitely got to have a fighting chance. You've definitely got to be in the thousands. So 2,000 is still pretty low. If you can get it up around, 4, 5, 7, you're in at least a respectable neighborhood. Think about
Okay.
press too, and you'll also want to think about this because of your digital strategy, digital marketing strategy, is video content's really important, right? So as I was talking about how there's no writers, there's bloggers. Those bloggers are basically they're not writing so much, they're lifting from the press release, especially the smaller sites. They're gonna copy maybe even verbatim, right? And some people are bothered by that, right? Because it's like, Jesus, you're not even writing. It's a shame, but it's also I don't have to explain to clients why a writer called you something or compared you to someone that you don't like. We wrote the press release, so everything in that press release we like. So when they copy it and put it in the article, yeah, we're happy, right? It got our message out. But the thing about the video, the thing is a lot of times they're going to copy that, have a paragraph or two, maybe a blurb, but they're going to use video content. So, doing a video for one of your songs, uh, really important, and that will having that content will also help you get get press as well. If you have no video at all during a campaign, I'll generally say, hey, if we're going to do a campaign, let's do a shorter campaign
Yeah.
because it's a lot harder to get people to write about the music than it is to just post the video and do a blurb. So anyway, I kind of went on a bit of an off tangent from the numbers
Yeah.
thing. There's not
La-
a
la-
magical number, but definitely, mul you know, I 5 to 10,000 would be kind of a really nice number to see when you're doing a press campaign. Have I done ones with less? Yes. I'm always going to want to see at least a few thousand on there. I will tell you that as you're working your way up the ladder, there are artists out there with 500,000 and 1 million monthly plays that are trying to get somewhere radio-wise in the US at the next level, and they're not at a high enough level, right? So you're never going to have enough. So at a certain point, you just have to get in the game too, right? So.
Great. Last question, and like I really, really appreciate you giving us your time this morning. It's great. It's been brilliant. It's been a rollicking hour with Adam Lewis, a fantastic hour with Adam Lewis. Last question, and basically you talked about some money earlier on, about a spend of kind of like you were talking about 4,000 up to $6,000 a month. What's the leap in terms of plugging spend if you're going to move from college radio and that kind of like non-commercial side to
Yeah.
AAA?
Yep. So college radio campaigns haven't changed price wise, and unfortunately in the 30 years that I've been doing this, I'm getting paid the same amount of money as I was when I started. It sucks. Um, your basic a college radio campaign, kind of standard campaign for a full album, maybe with a single or two prior as setup tools, gonna run you around $2,500 plus or minus. That's been pretty standard for 30 years. Um, if you add in the non-com AAAs on top of that, budget around another grand or so. It gets expensive when you add on a AAA commercial campaign. That's when you get into commercial radio, that's when it gets expensive. You start doing a commercial AAA campaign, that's $20,000, right? I don't do that. Again, you know, I'm an idiot, not a good businessman. I picked college radio for 2,500 as opposed to AAA radio for 20,000, right? Good business math, right? But that's the reality,
Hang on,
commercial.
20K a month.
No, no, for a campaign. For a
Okay.
campaign. Yeah. College radio campaign is going to run you about is going to, you're going to have depending on some singles, you might have some setup singles in there, but the core campaign of a college campaign is for the album. That's going to be about 7 or 8 weeks in length.
Okay.
And that's total,
Listen,
those fees are total fees. But with moving from college to non-com to AAA, you got to have the data, right? We talk people out of doing non-com campaigns all the time, and I talk people out of doing commercial radio campaigns all the time, out of that as well, because again, there's got to be a reason for you to move up the ladder.
cool. Listen, there's so much to take away from this. That this has been great. Really appreciate your time on this. People now have your email there as well. So, Adam Lewis from Planetary, thank you very much. That was fantastic hour.
Yeah, no, for sure. And someone just said some bands getting played on XM without massive figures. Yeah, listen, it can happen. XM will take a few chances, but 9 times out of 10, XM radio is really data driven, and they
That's it, right?
won't. There's an exception on Little Stevens Underground and a couple of key shows, but those are very small listenerships. So it all depends. But anyway, listen, anyone who wants to talk further, anyone who has music they want me to check out, by all means, feel free to email me, adam@planetarygroup.com. That's why I'm here. And thanks so much for having me, and have a great evening.
Thanks
And
very much, Adam.
I'll
Cheers.
see you I almost called it Hard Working Class
I'll
Heroes.
be-
Sorry. I'll see you at Irish Music Week in October.
See you,
Take
Adam.
care.
Thanks very much. See you,
Yeah, take
Sloan.
care.
Bye bye.
Yep, bye now.
Bye bye.